Welcome to Pandemic, ladies and gentlemen, again. Are we having fun yet, boys and girls? When I'm weary and I can't sleep, I count my blessings instead of sheep. And I fall asleep counting my blessings. When my bankroll is getting small, I think of when I had none at all, and I fall asleep counting my blessings. Or so, that was the thought of Bing Crosby. So, yes indeed, boys and girls, I can truly say that I am having a wonderful time. Pandemic is a multi-billion-dollar business. Coffee is for closers, and I've got a piece of it, and that's not just hyperbole. There is an ancient Chinese curse that you might live in interesting times, and surely that we have. And the Mandarin character for crisis is a unique marriage, perhaps queer, of two Mandarin characters, danger and opportunity. But opposites, at least in science, do attract. And as queer as that may be, they stand to remind us, boys and girls, that wherever there is danger, there is always, always, always opportunity. And fortune always, always, always favors the bold. So be bold, carpe diem, seize the day, and each moment I say, like a winner, or just stay home and cower in fear. It's either is your choice in a natural selection and determinism. And in a global pandemic, you just gotta ask yourself, do you feel lucky? Well, any good salesman worth his salt will inform you that hope is not a plan. You'll nod your head in agreement, because that's what you're supposed to do. And luck is for losers in Vegas, where a good gambler makes his own luck. And according to Dr. Rochelle Walensky, human choices have not been your friend, pal, in this pandemic. And in the last Project Management Simulation video installment, we had highlighted a profile in Courage from Scranton, PA. The fictional leader extraordinaire Michael Scott, senior manager at the Dunder Mifflin Paper Company, and our fictional pandemic leader who had been prepared to get our investigators on the ground earlier than the World Health Organization had, with 1,800 teams to release 5 epidemiologists, because he was certain that then he would have made better progress than his predecessor. A proposition that an after-action review of mission analysis functions clearly demonstrated would not have been the case. Looking at T-MEN and T-MAX, where it appears in mission analysis that the framing of the statement of the problem at the very outset and beginning had created a toxic command climate that permeated and corrupted the decision-making process and capabilities from the very beginning, growing as it were like an undetected cancer. Nobody went back to check, did an in-progress review from what appeared to be not a zoonotic evolution at all. And in this video, boys and girls, we shift the focus of examination to the accounting department in light of recent real-time and real-world events with an unprecedented raid in Florida that you may have heard about in the press. And for fans of the television sitcom The Office, know that when it comes to accounting in big town Scranton, PA at Dunder Mifflin, we look to Oscar Martinez, Kevin Malone, and Angela Martin, the accountants who count the beans and make sure that there's no loss of accountability of important things in a pandemic. 1 year into a pandemic, when you are working in the accounting department, you shouldn't personally want to be that guy who has to say, while it was different for everyone, we all lost something. But somebody we know had to say, you know, you've often heard me say before, I talk about the longest walk any parent can make is up a short flight of stairs to his child's bedroom to say, I'm sorry I lost my job. We can't be here anymore. Like my dad told me when he lost his job in Scranton, PA. I don't know about you, but had I my jitters, I don't want to be that guy. But maybe you're different. 1 year into a pandemic when you are working in accounting, particularly, you shouldn't personally want to be the guy who has to say to the folks in Scranton, PA, we've lost so much time over the last year because of bad accounting methods. We've lost family and friends because of bad accounting methods. We've lost businesses and dreams we spent years building because of bad accounting methods. We've lost time with each other because of bad accounting methods. And our children have lost so much time with their friends, time with their schools because of bad accounting methods. No graduation ceremonies this spring, no graduations from college, high school, moving up ceremonies. And we have to say, there's something else we lost. We lost faith in whether our government and our democracy can deliver on really hard things for the American people, because nobody ever got around to telling the guys up in accounting that they had to lose their jobs. You're fired. Well, let's just say that in a past life, I used to work in accounting. Yeah. And whether you are a teller at a bank or in bank operations, working in reconciliation, or in the comptroller's office doing cost accounting, you know that keeping track of valuable assets is kind of a priority for any business that wants to stay in business. And after that speech, when somebody had to say, please God, give solace to all of those people who lost someone, my past accounting experience, we'll say, reminded me about some classified information that maybe, just possibly, maybe, our diverse and inclusive accounting team of Oscar Martinez, Kevin Malone, and Angela Martin may have lost track. In the last video, as we discussed, Mike Scott, manager at the Dunder Mifflin Paper Company in Scranton, PA, as you recall, we had talked about a speech where, even after a year of pandemic, the zoonotic source remained unaccounted for and elusive. And when the intelligence community had been directed to redouble their efforts because of the time that had been lost in the beginning of the pandemic. Another little accounting problem. And most people associate the business of intelligence and national security with what is called classified information, a term and topic with which most believe themselves to be relatively familiar, especially in the national capital region, even if not far away places like Scranton, PA, where there probably is the highest concentration of people who hold at least a public trust clearance, they say, if not higher, being employed with the federal government and have undergone some level of a background check to ensure that they will not be subjected to undue influences, pressures, and evolutionary pressures to permit that information entrusted to their care to, escape. Like, at least according to the intelligence community, there was a low to high to moderate probability that a still elusive novel coronavirus had apparently done. 50-50 toss of a coin. But for those folks, like the folks in Scranton, PA, who may not be familiar with these terms, especially with so much in the news lately about classified information that somehow escaped from the White House, a lot of things escaping, which for purposes of illustration we shall refer to as the Dunder Mifflin Paper Company in Scranton, PA, in our management simulation, entrusted to our diverse and inclusive team of Oscar Martinez, Kevin Malone, and Angela Martin. Names have been changed to protect the innocent. There are actually only 3 levels of classified information, and believe it or not, even if you treasure your public trust, quote-unquote, clearance, that is actually not even a clearance. According to Executive Order 12958, April 17, 1995, Bill Clinton, a very important reference resource. Bookmark that inside your web browser. Information may be classified at one of the following 3 levels to essentially control access to information, accounting, or information security, InfoSec. The acronym. Number 1, confidential. Shall be applied to information the unauthorized disclosure of which reasonably could be expected to cause damage to the national security. That the original classification authority is able to identify or describe. Let's make sure we understand confidential information, because you may have some different ideas, especially if you work in a law firm with privileged and confidential communications, where the term may not mean quite the same thing as the way that it goes in your head. The unauthorized disclosure of which reasonably could be expected to cause damage to national security. No general or outlandish reasons. And that the original classification authority or the person who designated it as classified at the time, and there are only a few specific people who hold original classification authority, bookmark that term, put that in your notebook, as confidential, is able to specifically identify or describe. Be specific, Union Pacific. This may be like a confidential communication that may occur in attorney correspondence and privilege between an attorney and his client, but it also has to involve some matter of national security. And for the most part, that would not include everything that is held in public trust. So no, my friend, you do not technically have a security clearance. And you'd be surprised how many kids miss that on the test. 2, secret. Shall be applied to information the unauthorized disclosure of which reasonably could be expected to cause serious damage to the national security. That the original classification authority, again, is able to identify or describe. Important terms here. Serious damage to national security. And again, the original classification authority has to be able to identify that or describe that serious damage. You can't just slap a secret stamp on everything and claim it is for national security. And again, you'd be surprised how many kids miss that on the test. Top secret shall be applied to information the unauthorized disclosure of which reasonably could be expected to cause exceptionally grave damage to the national security. That the original classification authority is able to identify or describe. So when there is top secret information, like we are hearing so much in the news these days, the main focus of a lot of recent news these days, anyone claiming it is top secret should know that there is someone who was an original classification authority who had to describe that as top secret. 2, had to determine that it did not just present serious damage, like the significant damage that, according to the Emergency Use Authorization Declaration, back on what was the date, March 27, 2020, was presented by the COVID-19 threat. Significant damage to national security, but an exceptionally grave level of damage. So COVID-19, think of that. Think of, this exceptionally grave as bigger than. Okay. And number 3, that the original classification authority can articulate in specific terms that have been identified. Again, unlike the news, you can't just say the magic words top secret and be done. There's a little bit of explaining that has to go into that. And who is the ultimate classification authority under Executive Order 12958? The President, and he is at the tippy top of the food chain. So nobody has a higher clearance than the President. Nobody knows more than the President, or has access to know more than the President. He doesn't specifically know necessarily everything that's going on, but he is, the big chief. The buck stops here. And although a departing president retains his clearance upon leaving office, top secret, he no longer possesses the ultimate original classification authority and may not be read onto certain programs, which we'll get into later on. And only that person, the sitting president, has the authority to declassify something. If you are an original classification authority, you can classify and you can declassify. Just the way it works. It's like having 3 generals with the same rank, working at the same place, like on the Joint Chiefs of Staff, maybe all with 4 stars, but the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is in charge, the big honcho. And you'd be surprised how many kids miss that on the test. So, for a brief review, we have discussed levels of classification for your edification. And now that we know that you don't have technically in national security a clearance if you work for the government and have a public trust clearance, quote unquote, this may explain why when you leave the government and have a security clearance, like secret or top secret, you have a marketable asset in your inventory on your resume and can retain higher compensation because everybody wants to have access to the guy with the inside information or good intel. But if you just fill out a security questionnaire and hold a public trust clearance, good luck with that. If you have a security clearance, like secret or top secret, then about every 5 years you have to go through the process all over again to make sure that you are still reliable, stable, trustworthy enough to possess a security clearance, which is not the case if you just have a federal government job with your public trust. But refining further the difference between secret and top secret. If you tried to obtain a top secret clearance, then you know that you did not just have to successfully pass a background investigation, but also a special background investigation, or SBI, so that you could be granted access to secret compartmented information, or SCI. And that is top secret information, the unauthorized disclosure of which could cause exceptionally grave harm, but also for which you have to possess a specific need to know. Classified, it's all about need to know. It's part of the control in the accounting, so that even though somebody else may even be working right next to you with a top clearance, does not have a need to know, making you separate but equal in a sense. And if that is not clear as mud, you're fired. And forget about ever working in national security, or as we say, intelligence work. So let's move on now to a current topic of discussion in the news. Again, going back to what had been reported in the news at the very beginning. Apparently in January 2021, after the former senior manager of what we shall call Dunder Mifflin Paper Company in Scranton, PA, had departed office, somehow he managed to escape with classified documents that went undetected. Security, call accounting, and it was not apparently until late 2021 that the accounting department decided that maybe they needed to take an inventory of classified information that they were supposed to be keeping from escaping. If you have really, really classified documents, like top secret documents, they probably have numbers on them, like collectible items or collectors. And on January 20th, 2022, around the time that the, shall we say, head of accounting had announced his decision to retire in April 2022, it was reported that after some communications with the former senior manager, a total of 15 boxes were returned to the warehouse that somehow nobody noticed going out the first time. A little problem with accountability. Let's go back a little bit further in history, since apparently discussions began as early as May 2021, when the concern was only about some missing documents, including correspondence with the North Korean leader and a map of a Hurricane Dorian that had been infamously altered with a Sharpie pen, apparently, but no concerns about classified information that someone should have been accounting for. Now, what is not reported in the press is that a matter filed on January 6th had been docketed on the shadow docket for the United States Supreme Court on January 14th to determine whether certain standard metrics connected to COVID-19 were classified information. And all of this is within a reasonable time before the announcement about a retrieval of 15 boxes, which is of significance because under the time decision rule articulated in a case called MSBB, if an adverse action occurs within a reasonable time after a protected activity, a rebuttable presumption arises that the action is retaliatory. We call this a burden shifting mechanism in the courts. And court case here is filed by a sudden interest in 15 boxes about which nobody cared for about a year. Now suddenly everybody's screaming classified. And so on February 16th, Valentine's Day, after concerns about the boxes containing classified information, on February 10th, we decided, like I said, we have a piece of this billion-dollar problem to file an action in federal court in D.C. to obtain an inspection of those 15 boxes to determine specifically whether information related to COVID-19, our case, was in these boxes under the authority of the Presidential Records Act. That's the act that everybody was talking about that apparently was violated. Well, a normal citizen can use it too. At which time the court suggested that it had appeared that we wanted to submit a Freedom of Information Act request, which would not be the case because it was our desire to obtain an examination by the court of documents that had been classified, which they can do, which are exempt from disclosure under the FOIA rules, which that court especially should have known since it regularly deals with cases brought by the FOIA and apparently thought that we wouldn't notice that. A little peculiar. Even more peculiar is the dismissal of the matter seeking a response for the White House on the FOIA request in another court on October 29th down in Richmond. The very same day, coincidentally, that the unclassified report on the COVID-19 origins had been released by the intelligence community. And around the time that our accounting department began to raise concerns for unknown reasons about boxes that had been certain to have been removed upon the end of the former senior manager's term. Unlike updated reports that now suggest that the most recent raid had occurred based upon a tip from an informant. There's no informant back at that time. Just suddenly people decided to get interested in boxes that they didn't know disappeared when they left the warehouse. Who, to obtain a warrant, would have had to be a reliable source. So when we know it's somebody who's reliable, or we hope it's reliable, or we can't use this, who had provided credible information. Has to be a reliable person, has to be credible information, sufficient to establish good cause to dispatch a task force to obtain specific information, but also to get the green light from a magistrate. And otherwise, that would be invalidating the circle of the fruit of the poison tree rule, as we had pointed out on social media, when all of a sudden somebody came up with an informant to justify something that was supposed to be justified before we posted on social media. Again, just a little peculiar. A lot of things happening at the same time. So bottom line, boys and girls, at this point, what do we know with certainty? We have established through 2 years of robust litigation is that forces within the government, your government, you wanted to tell you the truth consciously, or if you prefer unwittingly, chose to ignore basic facts that suggested an unnatural origin, such as the small number of cases in China. A similar pattern that is presenting now with an emerging virus. And with COVID-19 only totaling 15 on December 31st, 2019, presenting in a venue the size of 9 American football fields in a city with a population at least as large as the population of the Commonwealth of Virginia. And also the affinity for snakes in the coronavirus, which types of viruses only infect mammals and birds, not reptiles. This raises suspicion. We have established through 2 years of robust litigation in the courts throughout the public health crisis is that certain forces within government had maliciously, or at least in gross negligence, ignored established protocols, such as validation of causation through kosher postulates, a methodology that has been known since the 1870s, and from which an infectious dose, a requirement to determine the proper correlates of protection in serological titers to develop an effective vaccine were ignored. And in a peace resistance, what we have established through 2 years of robust litigation in the courts, not covered in the press, having had over a half dozen cases docketed at the United States Supreme Court in under a year, engaging at critical decision points as the first and longest surviving litigation challenge against the lockdown. As the first and longest surviving litigation challenge against the non-medical grade face recovery. And as the first and longest surviving litigation challenge against the COVID-19 countermeasures products that have been popularly described as vaccines, is that consistently, without fail, representatives of the government have chosen the reaction of, rather than addressing the questions raised in court, serious questions, to prevail on the merits of the government, has decided to act like Kevin Spacey in the 1995 film Outbreak, when he portrayed an infectious disease control expert from the government who accidentally ripped his protective suit and exposed himself to the deadly Batava virus in Cedar Creek. Play it off like nothing happened, placing himself and others in grave and imminent danger. "95% of businesses fail, give a less than 5% chance of getting COVID-19. Are you a loser or you a winner?" This briefing is unclassified, as you were. Honest, as you were. My friend, unless your daddy happens to own the railroad, we're going to enjoy a very brief acquaintance. Hey, sugar, where's my coffee? You still here? I told you, fine. Go away. You're fired. This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.